Pues, buenas tardes, buenas noches for some of you. My name is Cherríe Moraga. This is a really special evening for me, and I think for the other writers as well, because if you have been attending the whole series during this time of Latinx Public Voice, I am in the good company of four writers for whom I hold much respect and admiration in their whole life's work. And so we're all coming together, and I would like to say that we're coming together this time out of initial requests that came from one of the writers, Roberto Lovato. And he said, well, what, so I had everything lined up with each of the writers, and then he said, well, when are we going to talk to each other? Which seemed like a really good idea. And so luckily everybody was available, and we finished last week with CRISTINA, RIVERA, GARZA. Everybody's available this week, and we were able to pull it off. So thank you for showing up, and those of you that are seeing this later after this evening, thank you for showing up, and please spread the word of these good words of the people that I've had the real privilege of spending time with over these, it's really been about 9 weeks. And those writers are Luis Rodriguez, Roberto Lovato, Maria Hinojosa, and as I say, Cristina Rivera Garza. And tonight I will be, it's a little different because nobody's live here with me. And so I am in the studio, and all the writers will be zooming into me. And it's kind of I called it the finale of 4+1 or the finale of 5 because I want them to ask me some questions. I've been really, it's been really great conversations. And I have to say sometimes and Maria, tenemos que hacerlo because after each conversation, we would be able to share a meal together, Celia Herrera Rodriguez, myself, and the writer. And it's almost like kind of the best stuff happened there. And great things happen, under the context of the studio. But really, it's really a beautiful thing to really see how, also we talk publicly, and I admire so much the intimacy and integrity of the writers that have what they presented in public. And it's also really beautiful just to talk, como, compañeros, compañeras. It's really been good for me. What I'd like to do is, certainly honor first and thank our sponsors, Chicano Studies Institute, the Department of English, Interdisciplinary Humanities Center, and the Multicultural Center. If this is your first time with us, this is sponsored by Las Maestras Center for Chicana, Indigenous Thought, Art, and Social Practice, of which I am one of the co-directors, and the other co-directors is Celia Herrera Rodriguez. Some of you may also know that Celia has participated in some of our conversations, but tonight she just decided, no, you writers just do your thing. So here we are just doing our thing. I want to give a little background because I have caught on that some people haven't a chance to see everyone but are very excited about seeing kind of everyone in every video. But now we're getting everybody together, and so for some people it is the first time. I will introduce each of the writers, tell a brief bio about them, but I want to talk a little bit about the series, and it was motivated by what we really understood. What many of us were having these kind of off, on the sidelines sort of conversations with each other during this incredible, year of, with 2021 going into 21 and feeling that the Latinx voice was invisible, that there was a kind of invisibility of brown people, Native, Latinx, and other folks of color that were being erased from the national debate and public consciousness. Really what people were talking about and whose perspectives were happening during one of the most emboldened periods of confrontation about racism and economic inequity that we have witnessed in over more than 50 years. Raza and Indigenas were disproportionately impacted by COVID, serving as frontline and essential workers, brown bodies suffering the consequences of entrenched militarization of the police and the border. And we learned API communities scapegoated through violent acts of terror, and we could go on. We missed our contribution to the conversation. That's essentially what it was, that was largely posed between black and white, knowing very well that what is required of us as people of color is to find common cause with one another, recognize one another's histories and conditions of U.S. citizenship or lack thereof as an integral component in comprehending our subjugation and encountering a road to full liberation. We can't do it without each other. And in introducing this series from the beginning, I had said that it was really just simply my, I quoted from this bridge called My Back, which I co-edited many years ago with Gloria Anzaldúa. And that vision was really of women of color feminism. So on a certain level, I can say personally, I'm just used to, us as people of color talking to each other. And I missed it. I wanted to know why white people were talking to black people and black people were talking to white people. And certainly, of course, black people were talking to black people. But I missed us. I missed us in it. So that's what motivated this whole conversation. And what's been really, really great for me, and I have to say, in this Latinx specific conversation, because also what I understand, and I think what many of us understand that have been practitioners of liberation struggles for many years, is that you have to be specific and understand the conditions of your own oppression, your own silences, and your longings for liberation, that you have to be specific about it in order to meet other communities on an even playing field. And so this was, it is that specificity of our oppression that then from there, and liberation, from them we can begin to make connections with other people. And if there isn't that specificity, and this is what Black Lives Matter is about, it is that specificity, and righteously, and it should be. And it's from those places of specificity then that we connect. So this is our specificity. It is our moment to talk, just in this one little occasion of these, of this series, to do that. Of course, it's happening in other places, but there was a certain desire to talk about it as writers. For me, I'm saying personally, I miss us. I miss a public voice where we are really in conversation with each other, asking sometimes what feel like taboo questions to ask. So this is what you have to look forward to tonight. We've talked about a full range of topics from the prison system, gang intervention, migrant rights, transnational identities and violences, border identities. We talked a lot about writing and teaching practices, our traumatic histories of colonization, native genocide, sexual violence, and its ever aftermath. All of that, the ever aftermath of all of those kinds of ways in which that we have been silenced, or we have been, what we carry in our body as memory, those traumas. But of each of these issues, there's hugely large considerations. They were housed in the specific telling of the writer's life, the worlds they've inhabited, and what I have come to know, what each of us have come to know along the way. And the reason I think that I felt like we got some really great interviews, and I think the reason for it is that they were talking about large issues, but it was generated by a book, at least one book. And it's not the only book they've written, but it's at least one book in which they use the I as a site of authority, that they had a right to tell this story. Some of them were essays, some of them are memoirs, but in each one, this gave them permission then to also look at themselves and see their role as writers and as thinkers, and as people who have experienced, have experienced in their own lives discrimination, trauma, etc. So they have been I think each of their featured books have been an offering. So without, saying anything more, I think I'm just going to give you some brief bios on each of them so we can then proceed, and I'll stop talking and you can hear from them. We're going to begin with Luis Rodriguez, and I'm going to read their bios. So if I'm looking down and up, it's because that one of the most prominent Chicano literary voices in America, indeed. Luis J. Rodriguez is the author of the best-selling memoir, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in L.A., As an activist writer, Rodriguez has spent over 40 years going to schools, cultural centers, prisons, jails, and juvenile lockups in and outside of the U.S. to facilitate writing workshops, poetry readings, talks, and healing circles. He is the co-founder of Tia Chucha's Centro Cultural bookstore and press, now in its 30th year, in the San Fernando Valley, LA. From 2014 to 16, Rodriguez served as the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. And his book, From Our Land to Our Land, I love it, Essays, Journeys, and Imaginings from a Native Chicanx Writer. The next person to speak will be Roberto Lovato. And Roberto Lovato is a journalist, an educator, and the author of Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. It's a New York Times editor's choice. The recipient of a Pulitzer Center grant, Lovato has reported on government-sanctioned violence, terrorism, the drug wars, and refugee crises from the United States to Mexico and El Salvador to numerous other sites of political conflict. As the co-founder of Dignidad Literaria, he continues to advocate for equity and literary justice for Latinx writers left off the bookshelves of the U.S. and out of the national dialogue. And his book of 2020 is Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. And our third guest is Maria Hinojosa. She is the first Latina in many newsrooms. She is the anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning Latino USA on NPR. She is the founder and CEO of Futuro Media. I'm going from English. Is that media or media? Media. Futuro Media Group, based in Harlem, which produces the show. Her 30-year career has garnered Hinojosa 4 Emmy Awards and 2 Robert F. Kennedy Awards for excellence in journalism, among many other honors. She was the first Latina to anchor a PBS Frontline report, Lost in Detention, in October 2011. Hinojosa's journalism has informed millions about the changing cultural and political landscape in America and abroad from a distinctly Latina perspective. And the last person to be speaking is going to be Cristina Rivera Garza. She is a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship in 2020. She is a distinguished professor in the University of Houston's Department of Hispanic Studies and leads the graduate Spanish language creative writing concentration there. Born in Mexico and a resident of the United States for, it's not 2 decades, I think it's more like 3, I think she corrected us. Rivera Garza is a prolific writer of fiction and critical essays, including nearly 20 works in Spanish, 2 of which garnered her the prestigious Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Prize for a book written in Spanish by a female author. Many of Rivera Garza's works have been translated, and this is happening many, many more just recently in the last couple of years, into English, including Grieving, which is a book that is presented here, an especially timely reflection for a U.S. readership. And the subtitle of that is Dispatches from a Wounded Country. So I'm happy to see all of you here, even virtually. Too bad we can't have our dinner again together. I enjoyed that. Anyway, so I think we're just going to start out. What we had talked about was, each of the writers posing a question for each other, and so we'll begin that way, and then see where that takes us, and maybe we'll have a little conversation in between, see what emerges. But make sure that that each one of you will have questions for each other. So we'll start in the same order. So Luis, we'd start with you and see what kind of question you have for us.
Thank you, Cherríe. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And the question I have to ask is, how do you all navigate who you are with how you identify yourself to others, with what others perceive of you? And maybe I'll give an example of just how I mean that. I I'm always battling what people want to say about who I am or what I'm not. So I'm always trying to challenge it. I am not an immigrant, and that's something important for me because I feel that my indigenous roots cannot make me an immigrant. My mother's Tarahumara, Chihuahua, parts of Texas and New Mexico is part of the desert. We've been there at least 10,000 years, as I've mentioned before. And I don't feel we're migrants, we're refugees. My experience is that my father and mother were not obreros, they were professionals, but they were treated really badly in Mexico. And my father was incarcerated for his politics. And so when he left Mexico, it was a political thing. You know, he couldn't stand the politics of Mexico, the PRI, the whole thing. But unfortunately, coming over here, he's not recognized for his credentials, for his knowledge. He ran a high school, none of that. So he had to work in dog food factories and construction, do everything. My mom worked as a costurera, cleaning people's homes. We did all the Mexican migrant work here. And I'm working class. So that's another identity that's important for me, that I'm working class. I worked in steel mills. I worked in factories. I try to survive that way. I am also, of course, a journalist and a poet and a novelist. So I was all these things. I'm also a father and a grandfather and great-grandfather. There's so many ways to identify. And so I just wanted to see how you all navigate that for yourselves in a world that tries to put you, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not all these things that people try to put you in there, but that's the world that we're in. So I just want to open it up that way.
Good question. Anybody want to jump in? Maria, I saw a lot of noddings.
Well, the short answer, first of all, it's such an honor to be here on a historic night with Cherríe. Thank you. And, you know, I could just listen to you talk and talk and talk and talk. The way you talk, the way you write is poetry to me always, and I learned so much. So thank you. And thank you to my bro, Roberto, for posing this as, can we have some time to spend together? I really appreciate it. It's great to be here with Cristina and mi compañero Luis, who I haven't seen in a long time. The short answer, I was like, well, I have 2 adult children who live here in my house. And so they keep me very real. So whatever illusions that I have in terms of ego and whatever, just on a very real sense, that is something that keeps you real when you have people who you love, who keep you grounded. So that is central for me. I had an almost 2-hour interview yesterday with Shireen Marisol Meraji and Maria Garcia from the podcast Anything for Selena, where we were talking about how, you know, the whole conversation of race and are we women of color or are we not? So I've been thinking quite a bit about this and how I identify myself and how, if the politics were different, if things had changed and 9/11 hadn't happened and there hadn't been this complete turn to complete anti-immigrant sentiment, who knows? But I have myself, and I was pretty radical. I've been pretty radical throughout, but I'm increasingly radicalized because of the moment. So just to basically answer the question, after having my roots looked at, you know, by Henry Louis Gates and actually being on television, where they're like, hey, guess what? You have conquistadores in your blood. And you're like, oh my God. You know, of course, only the men we know. But then in the end, I find that I am fully 1/4 indigenous. So I appreciate what you're saying, Luis. I really do. It's like, wow, that's very, but I have to recognize de que yo sí soy no solamente inmigrante, sino parte de esa trayectoria conquistadora that I have to come to terms with. But now I am like, if people ask me how I identify, proud Mexican immigrant, journalist, American citizen. Y de ahí, you know, feminist, etc. You know, but I do think that we suffer from the invisibility, right? It's just like, wow, it's happening before we speak, which is why all of this is so historic and a form of resistance for sure, because we are witnessing our invisibility as we speak. So at the same time, we're trying to define ourselves and own ourselves and own our voices. And it's a complicated time for many young people, I think, for many Latinos and Latinas too. So I'll leave it there, but I love the question.
You too. Cristina, you look ready.
Yes, sorry, I have muted myself, and I don't want to mute myself, of course. Thank you so much for the question, Luis, and again, Cherríe, was just wonderful. Just the conversation that we had, and just being with all of you right here. What a privilege! It's just fantastic. Thank you so much. And let me tell you just something before I get into my actual answer. I am very much, I'm very much with the phrase that you just said, Maria, increasingly radicalized. That's what these times are calling for. And I too appreciate what you just said, Luis, that this answer requires big chunks of time. A true answer about where do we belong to, or where we are from, requires to go back in time and way into the future as well. I am too a heir of migrants, both within Mexico and the United States. Peoples who have crossed the border again and again, always looking for a better life for the future generations. I just published last year a book, Autobiography of Cotton, where I'm exploring that migrant experience of my grandparents, who I too discovered that were members of indigenous communities in San Luis Potosí, and that they had walked all the way up north to the coal mining areas of Coahuila, and then finally settled around the cotton fields on the Texas and Tamaulipas border. So answering who I am now will require to embrace, obviously, all that experience. And I've been living, as Cherríe said, in this country for 30 years now. I've been, what has been really confining usually is the stereotype. Becoming visible doesn't mean that we become legible. And I'm always very willing to keep that sense of opacity also as a way of resisting easy categorization. And at times that requires that I move quickly, right, to escape, capture. But at times it requires to move very slow, with the same goal, escaping that capture. The point to me is to being very willing to complicate narratives. Always, as willing as I am to pose the uncomfortable question, which is always that we always ask our students to do in the classroom. I think the body in which I live, it is a complicated question, whatever I go through, both in the United States and in Mexico. So the language that I use, the accent that I have, both in English and in Spanish, it is a question that is continuously, ceaselessly posed into the environments I've moved through. And I have to say that I've been, especially during the last 4 years that migrants and migrations receive so much hate, I was very willing to identify myself as a proud migrant, yes, and a migrant of Mexican parents, of Mexican-American grandparents, a migrant mother of my son, who is also, who was born into the United States, but keeps on moving also across borders. And I think there is something really important about that experience, about being able to belong to several territories and to entertain dialogues and deep, meaningful conversations with the peoples that we form communities with. I think that to me, that's what really matters at the very end of the day. And that's what the sense of belonging comes through. What I do, what I write, it's organically connected to the language that doesn't belong to me, that comes to me already inscribed in too many histories and stories. And at the very least, what I aspire to is that this language and this work goes back to the communities that it belongs to. And that reciprocity is just fundamental to what I am here. And by here, I mean the United States and Mexico and the very complex relationship that we have in between the two. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, if you don't mind, before Roberto comes on, let me just say one thing. My mother picked cotton in southern Texas when she started at 9
Oh my
years old.
gosh.
So that I'm going to be interested in your book about cotton. I just want to let you know that's
wonderful.
a very important part. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Roberto? I think your mic, yeah.
Sorry, I said fuck. How come you have me following these?
I was trying to cut out the fuck part, but no, you.
Well, no. First of all, I'm really honored to be with y'all here tonight. You know, with 3 writers, but they're not just writers; they're human beings. 2 of whom I've had a lot of interaction with, Maria and Luis, for some time, and les tengo mucho cariño, and le tengo cariño al trabajo de Cristina, y mucho respeto. And obviously, Cherríe, I love Cherríe because I think about you every 3 days, in fact, because I go hiking up Bernal Heights here in San Francisco.
Right.
And I walk by Betsy Street where you used to stay when you were my neighbor down from Folsom Street.
Right.
So to go to Luis's question, I'm a different, I navigate it different ways. It's identity's contextual and it's fluid, as I think what Cristina was saying. I don't want to essentialize myself. And I think we need to de-essentialize ourselves and other people's, because essentializing people freezes them in this amber ice of racism, sexism, transphobia, that those are all frozen, ways that people look at us in different ways. So I mean, one of the identities I have is I'm a proud member of the Frijoligentsia. We're all, we all write, we're all kind of in the mix. And I came up with this term thanks to Zora Neale Hurston, because, she was looking at the sellouts of her era up there where Maria lives in Harlem, right? And she came up with the term, and don't quote, it's in quotes, niggerati, to describe the sellouts up in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance. So I thought, okay, maybe we'll call the Latino sellouts beanerati. But then I'm a believer in being positive and having, positive things that'll help us sustain the struggle. And I came up with Frijoligentsia. So that's one of my identities. And, I'm kind of officially in now because I wrote a book. Damn. So, I'm going to, milk the writer identity as long as it lasts. I may never write another book again, but seriously, I identify as Salvadoreño, although I'm not a fan of nation states and nation state identity at this point. Whatever our nation state, Salvador, Mexico, US. I mean, one of the things I do in my book is to show the silence and the violence that are at the heart of nations. Right. And so, in the course of writing my book, like everybody that's spoken so far, I discover, things like the fact that mi bisabuelas on both sides of my family are indigenous. Like on my father's side, both great grandmothers were Pipil Nahuatl, and then on my mom's side, there's like Mayan bisabuela, which I didn't really know until I really started excavating that history for myself, which I encourage. Whether or not you're a member of the Frijoligentsia, do it. Really dig deep and get your roots and feel them. But also, I wrote a memoir, so I had to come to grips with the fact that my dad, for example, in a lot of its father-son story is, my dad was involved in what would be called criminal activities. And I put that in quotes because we all know that criminality is a construct, and that it's a construct created to jail, kill, and create profits on that jailing and killing. So, but my dad was involved in what Maria, during an interview, called fayuca, contrabando, transferring goods across the border. So I had that part, and then my very Catholic mom kind of shaping my identity as somebody that, yo era bien, no fui bien católico. I kind of said, fuck it. I didn't do my primera comunión or anything, and I rebelled against that. And then I kind of crossed the border over into the criminal side myself, right? Robbing cars, robbing people, drugs, things that some working class young people here in the mission were engaged in. And so overcoming that became a part of my identity too. And so, I identify as a dude that grew up on Folsom Street, down the street from the projects. But now one of my favorite parts, since coming out in the book about a few things, so that's the beauty of the memoir genre, right? I would encourage anybody. I would encourage anybody to write, to work out your healing, like some of these fucking profiteers do, right? These farsantes that they're out there. Hey, I'm going to give you the tools on how to write your way to healing for $1,000 or some shit. Like, I don't encourage that, but I do think if you're honest with yourself in the course of writing, healing will come, because there's an intimate relationship between truth and healing, both on the intimate personal level, but at the larger national epic level of, say, the truth of what Barack Obama did in Cristina Garcia's Mexico, which this country is fucking unwilling to face. Obama's
not if we have our way about it.
Yeah, right. But generally speaking, it's the country's silent about Obama's role in Mexico, or in caging, separating, and killing children from Mexico and Central America south of the border, to the tune of 3,000, for example. I've seen the bones. I've been to the mass grave sites. I did that trek. And so in the face of this story that I tell of what some students of violence called apocalyptic violence in El Salvador's history, my new identity is now partly person that has faced the Dante's circles of apocalyptic violence over the course of my adult life. And last point is, I also got to come out about this part of my book, Revolucion. As if you read my book, I've joined the FMLN guerrillas. I was an urban commando, and I've been in the closet about that for most of my adult life outside of a limited circle. And now I'm free to be able to speak, and it's empowering, to say the least, to be able to speak and say, yeah, yo fui revolucionario, and here's what my heart beats like. If your heart beats like this too, maybe you're a revolutionary, because you're going to need it right now for this apocalyptic moment that we're in. Okay, so that's kind of my lightweight way to start my intro.
Hey, Cherríe, can I say one quick thing?
Sure, no, go
because
ahead.
I just happened to have a pretty extraordinary moment that I interviewed AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't know where you stand with her, Roberto, because you got a very sharp sword. But one thing that we did talk about was this notion of Latinidad. And I asked her, the question that we as professors encounter all the time with our students, which is, am I Latino or Latina enough? And I mentioned this to AOC, and she was like, well, it's an interesting question. She said, of course you are enough. You're born enough. And she said, but are we enough? And she said, we need to learn from the Black Lives Matter movement and from the history of resistance of Black Americans who have studied their history and learned their history. And so she was basically saying, like, in order to answer that question that Luis poses, like, who are you in this particular question? Do your history, do that, which is what all of us are saying. Like, do your history, find out what the story is, find out what your complexity is. But I do think that part of combating the invisibility that we're all feeling is to know our history. And it's, we can talk about it more, but it's part of what I write about. O sea, hay cosas bien feas, in particular for Latinos, Latinas, Mexicans. I'll just end with one of the last trips I took. I was in Detroit in March of 2020, and we were doing a live in the thick, but I ended up encountering paisanos y paisanas from Detroit whose families were deported in the 1930s. And it's just like, are you kidding? Like they call it the Great Repatriation. Fuck that. But el punto is like that. In the 1930s, they were deporting Mexicans from Detroit, and they were like already born in Detroit, and they were deporting us. So that's some history that we need to own, so that coño, we can own our place in this país.
Yes. Well, I think there's so many things that I think I'm also going to respond to the question of identity that we suppose, but I do want to say, so I don't forget, when you brought, Maria, when you brought up the thing about something about that, well, I wrote the line, when we were talking about the African Americans, black people, you know, in the movement. And I think one thing that I've said for a long time, they know they're black. And I think that that's different among Latinos. That's problematic for us, that they're still ambivalent, you know, as, I mean, in Latinos, there's so many different groups, so it's kind of ridiculous to talk in that way. But I think when we're talking about, you know, particularly, you're talking about the Caribe, you're talking about Central America, you're talking, you know, I mean, it's like, and Mexico, et cetera, Puerto Ricanos, I mean, all of that there's, that understanding that we are people of color is a major move. It is a major move. And I always have said, well, they know they're black. And so you can have parts of the African American population get become very corporate, become, you know, all of this, and somehow they still know they're black. But in all the years that I've lived, my perception has been is that when Latinos become middle class, they often forget they are of color. They often forget that they're mestizos. They often forget that there is an origin story there attached to who they are in the United States, you know? So it's a kind of hard way of saying it, but you know, I see that, I mean, for example, I see that things are changing. Things are changing in terms of our kind of national sense of us in art production, in our literature, et cetera. But I think partly we can't expect people, it's like what's so contradictory about it is there's an horrible, horrible racism against brown people in the United States, particularly if they are obreros. If they're working class, if they're workers, there's incredible. I mean, it's your experience is that no somos nadie, right? I mean, if there's a somos in it, so that, you know, and sometimes, you know, entre nos, I'll say, well, you know, there's nothing sexy about being a Mexican. And these seems like very taboo things to say, but these are actually things we're saying with each other about our own people, because we are sitting here with a fair amount of privilege, you know, and yet, that racism, somehow there's a disconnect that we are allowed as Latinos not to identify. We're allowed not to identify, and that's highly problematic. And when we get to Roberto's question about revolution, I think there's something tied into that. What I'd say for myself is that even in the long trajectory of mestizaje, and, you know, I've written for many years, I'm the mestiza of the mestiza, you know. And, you know, and in my, I think, braver days when I was young, it's just like, you know, that it's like if you're talking about the spectrum around indigenous identity, well, it's there, but it's a lot of generations. And yet, somehow, you know, as a young person, I didn't feel like there was any other way to be Chicana. And that became a life. And so, you know, I think some of the things that we need to talk about is, you know, this kind of subversion that's happening around calling all Mexicans settler colonialists. You know, I appreciate Luis's entry but the only people that are talking it that way are in the universities. And so another thing to talk about is what is the impact on this, you know, to what degree does the university then also impact policy and impact how we look at each other, and how does that, you know, pass down, right? So, you know, for me, I see, and I think I said this once I think it was when I was in DePaul and you and I, Maria, were doing a talk, and I walked in the room and it was beautiful, there's tons of raza, beautiful, beautiful crowd of people. And I walked in and there was a sister, a black sister there in the room, and I love Chicago. I love Chicago raza. It's just such a beautiful mestizaje of people, right? Because it's also, it's also Puertorriqueño and Chicano, together. And I'm talking, and it was after kind of a Q&A or something, but Maria and I had done a dialogue with each other. And I remember standing there and I'd say, I know I was a disappointment to you when I walked in the room. And they'll look at me like that, and I said, I know you didn't expect me to look this way, because mostly they read you. They just read you in an article or whatever like that. And I say that not because it's a very, and I'm trying to rise to the occasion of your question, Luis, because and in a very silly way, I say, I wish I looked the way you imagined me, because you deserve it. You deserve it. You deserve to have someone who looks just like you saying exactly the radical things that I'm saying, because that is true. And it's a very hard thing to say. And this one black woman who was right in the front, she looks at me like she can't believe that would be said. And every single time, it's painful. Every single time. And that's just the point. But I'm not saying, oh, poor me. There's nothing in it that's poor me. It's just like, this is the fact. These are the bodies we have. These are the histories we have. And I want to then switch over to Roberto's question about revolution.
Well, I'm sorry to kind of change up on y'all, but please, check out the chat. I changed my question on y'all at the last minute. I'm not trying to throw a curveball or anything, but I was inspired by just some of the conversation, and I'm publicly a writer now. Like, wow, check that out. So I want to ask you a writerly question, since I'm seriously, I have respect for everybody here, and and I really, I wrote my book with an eye to the present and to the past, because it's called Unforgetting, but it's also the way forward has to look backward. So thinking about, this country is becoming more Latino-Americana, right? The United States, the division between rich and poor has surpassed that of America Latina now. The militarization of the police is a part of that disease of a country in decline, cancerous, with racism, transphobia, sexism, patriarchy, class warfare, blah, blah, blah. So I'm really concerned about, just beyond our community, but just generally, what is the literature of the future that's going to help people, equip people for the brave new world that we're entering? What does that literature look and feel like? It's I was going to frame the question, what do you tell your kids? Because it's a similar question, although the kids' question is more intimate versus what do you tell the young people in general? So that's kind of my question, is what is the literature that's going to prepare our youth for the brave new world that they're in? Because I don't see it in the Pulitzers and poetry or mainstream, because you don't get any prizes if you go and you say, fuck Obama's policy, right? You just don't. And so, a lot of us are living under the boot of that silencing, or that attempted silence, because it didn't work for some of us. But if you have a left of center view in literature, you are not embraced, generally speaking, by the literary community. So, just look at all the prizes for awards. And I'm sorry, Lin-Manuel Miranda, he's included in there, but I like AOC better than I like Lin-Manuel Miranda, Maria, just so you know. So, but what is the look at the prizes, Pulitzer and all others. Look at it from the perspective of how many people of these intellectuals were publicly critical of Obama during those 8 years? And you'll find what I found, which is all of ni mierda.
I was.
So,
I wrote it. But I didn't get a Pulitzer, but I'm just saying.
right, but by and large, the prize, you don't get a prize for being left of the Democrats. So that's my question: is what is the literature of the future that prepares our young people for the brave new world?
Can I get into
Please,
this?
please, we.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. That was a great question. As I say in my book, everything we're talking about that becomes so real is all illusion. Borders, mortgages, the incarceration system is all made up stuff. Somebody sat down and made it up, but it's impacting us, and yet it's completely fabricated.
Thank you. Yeah.
So you have to start with challenging the very basis of that narrative. It's all made up. Race is made up. We know it. We're caught in it. We talk about it, and but it's all made up. The borders, the countries. This is why I say from our land to our land. It doesn't matter that that border came down. That's our land from tens of thousands of years. You're just being there.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? But the border comes down. Now we're the immigrants. Now we're the strangers. Now we're the aliens. I don't know how many times, I'm sure all of you went through this, where people would come by and they do these drive-by epithets. Go back to where you came from, all these white people. When I lived in the San Gabriel Valley, when there was a lot of white people, you would get that all the time. So to me, that's one thing. I think the new literature or the way we express ourselves, to me, has to have a borderless imagination, has to have an imagination that's not bound on illusion. It's that statement that Marx is credited with, is that an invitation to abandon illusions about a situation is an invitation to abandon the situation in need of illusions. So I think that's the idea. Let's just call it what it is. I'm not saying I'm not a U.S. citizen. I get a passport. It doesn't really matter to me being a U.S. citizen. I know because when I go to other countries, nobody sees me as American. You know what I'm saying? I go to Europe and they think that I'm from Mideast, I'm Moroccan, or if I tell them I'm a Sheik, like in France, I'm Mexican, they think it's an exotic thing, They never see me as American. When I go to Latin America, it's like, well, we don't know what you are because they don't like Chicanos necessarily. On the other hand, I'm speaking Spanish like crazy, and they go, oh, you know what I'm saying? There's so many illusions that we're living under. So I would say that's one thing, the literature that can break through all that, the literature that can say we can imagine a world that's not illusion-filled, but also can address the situation that required us to create all these illusions now we're all stuck in. I agree with Roberto about the nation state. Very important made-up thing. As I've said before, we're imprisoned by nations. It used to be that refugees and migrants would go wherever the water was clear, wherever the weather was good. People went back and forth, and now we're in prison. That's why you have famines. Famines go on, and you would go somewhere else. You can't. If you're in Africa and you're in famine, you're stuck and you're refugees. All these things get created. Same with Central America and all the situations there and the violence that we helped create as a country and everything else. And now we're like saying, well, they don't got a right to migrate. People have been migrating for tens and thousands of years. That's what human beings do. Their nation is the world.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? The planet is their nation. That's how we used to see it. So I would say, how to bring in that kind of imagination through our writing and through our literature. I want to say one last other point, a couple points from Cherríe's statement. One is that when I was living in the San Gabriel Valley, in my little barrio, Las Lomas, South San Gabriel, we were all the brown-skinned Mexicans. There's always light-skinned Mexicans, and there's always a güero in your barrio, but we were the dark-skinned, obrero, working-class migrant. We came there to work the fields. Fields were gone by the time I was there. It was a run-down neighborhood. But I tell you one thing that I recall. We knew we were Chicanos. We knew that we spoke the Spanish and mixed in with the English and our own calo, our caliche, as they say in Central America, our own slang. We knew who we were. It wasn't no issue. We took on everybody, and people couldn't stand that because they wanted us to fall into what? Why can't you be more Mexican? Why can't you be more American? They didn't realize that we didn't care a damn about that stuff. We were clear, and the whole world kind of had to look at Chicanos in a certain way. They actually emulated us or went to war with us. And I will have to say, unfortunately, Mexicans are very warlike in that sense. Almost every refugee group that came to the LA had to deal with Mexicans, Chicanos. Chicanos took on everybody. It's just kind of a sad thing, but it's also like the blacks, when they came there, they had to deal with Chicanos. They had Central Americans that came there, the Cambodians, pobrecitos, that came in from the killing fields, and they come into the killing fields of Long Beach. You know what I'm saying? They didn't. Everybody had to address the Chicano thing because we knew in our barrios who we were. Now we were completely screwed because of that. The sheriff's deputies, the way they policed us, the killings, the way they controlled us, all kinds of things, the way they broke us our neighborhoods, gentrification that broke up neighborhoods. I appreciate the whole story about the mission, you know, because the mission is another great example of all that. And but yet I knew that even in the mission and those neighborhoods, people knew who they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that gets lost when you get into the, like you said, the university academic world, where they don't know how to place you, they don't know what to call you, they want to put you in this category or another. But again, let me say the literature that I'm looking for, that's revolutionary for me, is got to be seeded in a new soil, not the old.
See, I think that the new soil is actually part of what we've been living in. And I think that Latinos and Latinas are living in this particular moment, and others, and immigrants, for example, are living through a particular moment that I'm going to compare to my experience growing up as a little Mexican immigrant girl in the south side of Chicago during, you know, I mean, I was little, but the civil rights era was there. I mean, I had a chance to see Martin Luther King on television. He was real. It was a human being, right? In fact, it was Martin Luther King who spoke to me the first time when I was like, oh, bet, maybe I can be an American, because I knew I was Mexican. And so I think that we're living through something very similar. And I think that the radicalization is actually those young people, maybe they're not writing about it now because they're too much in it. But I think that they are more politicized. I don't know, you know, the question of, well, you know, is Simon and Schuster going to publish these radical young? I don't know. But at the same time, who is one of the most popular politicians and leaders happens to be a young Latina named AOC. And if they were to publish her, she would sell like crazy. So there is, and the thing that I hope that Latinos and Latinas in particular would understand is our power in the market. We know this. 1 out of every 4 movie tickets, well, before the pandemic, was bought by a Latino or Latina. Latina consumers have, I mean, okay, we're going to put the critique of capitalism on the side for a second, because we can go there, because let me tell you, I've had it with capitalism, okay? But just for the sake of the conversation, Latinas are the most powerful consumers in the United States of America. We actually have a tremendous amount of power in that sense. Pero everything that is done, the entire erasure, the invisibility, is to assure us to just be like, well, do we have power? Don't we have power? What the fuck? Which is why I happen to have just interviewed the director of the movie In the Heights. I think it's going to be pretty revolutionary. I actually do. I think because there's so much joy in it, and it's also so street, and it's such a celebration of street Latino, Latina love, that I think it might be revolutionary. And therefore, that's a whole young generation of artists, actors, you know, maybe not so much Lin-Manuel, or Kiara, who wrote the screenplay, or John M. Chu, who directed it. But it's super intersectional. And I think I'm going to hang on to hope tonight, you guys, because it's been a long day, and I'm going to hang on to hope is what I'm saying. And I put it back on the young people, because this is where I do think they will listen to us, right? Because now como que somos, and our message to you is own it. Yeah, we're all afraid. You don't think Roberto was afraid? Look, he's telling you like, wait, man, I'm a writer. And it's like, yeah, you are a writer, Roberto. And we had to go through shit. Luis Rodriguez has gone through hell. I don't know so much Cristina, Cherríe. Oh, o sea, it's been hell. It's also life, which is beautiful. But you as young people, you better be owning this stuff right now. You better be feeling that pressure on your shoulders to own your power. Because this is it. And I just think back to Cherríe, you know, who I knew when she was, you know, taking those risky steps of like, I'm going to move to New York. Yeah, it's risky. Yes, it's scary. Ike, we need you young writers to be that. to answer the question that Roberto has. Great question, Roberto.
Absolutely. I hear you. Absolutely. You know, for me, writing is been always a critical practice. If I'm writing, that means that I'm trying to explore critically whatever I happen to be interested in. With some luck, that critical thinking will become, or is becoming in the same process, critical practice, is practice with others, right? And I'm, you know how the stereotypical view of writers usually picture them writing in isolation in front of the computer or with a notebook, and writing is supposed to be this quite individualistic kind of activity. I, of course, don't agree with that because if we work with language, we are working with others. There is no solitude in writing. Writing is a way of making community. So I'm especially interested in the kind of writing that I've been calling disappropriative writing, which essentially means to assume that writing is a plural practice in its very roots, that we are always writing with others, and that both in terms of our aesthetics and on ethics, it would be better for our books to really show, to make visible that organic interconnection with the texts of others, with the voices of others, with the experiences of others. If we're writing about others, even if we're writing about ourselves, even if we're using the I, we are writing about others, these others that we become in connection to every single individual and every single community that we belong to. So to me, Roberto, that book of the future, the book that I would like to talk to these younger generations is a book that we are going to be writing together, co-authoring, creating these books that I've been also calling communalists books, libros de la comunalidad, right? Books in which it is very clear and very obvious that there is not a single genius there tormenting himself, usually, you know, to tell his marvelous story. But this kind of forum that we create when we let others in where they belong, right, in the very heart of our stories. And then to address the second part of your question, you mentioned there the climate change, you know, the very real challenges that we are facing right now. So I've been thinking a lot about that. It's part of what I teach in my classes at the university. That I need to be thinking more closely about the relationship between body and territory. So because it's very easy, you know, to be talking about our stories as though they are only human stories. They are human-centered, and we are not necessarily there. There are many books for which these other components, these other beings that we share the planet with, are simply not accounted for in these stories. And I think the book of today, the book that is going to help us go through the future, the writing that is going to teach us something critical about the future, is a writing that will have to encompass, to include both human and non-human agents. And it's a writing that has to make as complex as it is, that relationship between the bodies that we inhabit and the territories that we belong to. And as you've said, but all of you very clearly, of course, territory is a much larger, much longer, way more interesting story than the story of nation states, right? And we have to go back in time and way into the future to be able to amass, to bring all that energy together. So that's the kind of book. It's a book of disappropriation. It's a book of communality. And let me correct myself. It's not even a book. It's a writing practice. And writing practices sometimes become books and sometimes they don't, and they don't have to, right? So this writing together with others, but when these others are not only humans, I think this is what is helping me in the present to think also critically about what is to come and what kind of role will I and us be playing in that world.
I just want to, before Sharif goes, I just want to second what you were saying about territory. There's a great book by a scholar named Stuart Eldon on territory. And he speculates with some, educated guessing that the term territory shares etymology with the term terror,
Yeah.
right? And so, and we're talking about borderlessness and everything. And that's why I kind of talk about in my book, the machete of memory, right? That basically cuts us off and makes us good Americans and fuck the rest of the world. And you can be not just white, you can be black, brown, you can be complicit with the borders of the empire.
That's true.
That's what borders do. So I appreciate your comment on that. And I saw that concept in Grieving about the communality of storytelling, and I didn't realize it until I wrote my acknowledgments. Fuck, there's like 7 pages of acknowledgments.
If we were truly serious, all our books would be just an acknowledgement, right? And then
That's
just
true.
1 or 2 words that we pitch in at the very end of all that. Yeah.
Very true. Well, I think that a few things come to mind for me. One thing is that I don't think it's any accident that a lot of young people are writing futuristic things, that they're writing a lot of sci-fi, they're writing a lot of, there's a whole, Afro-futurist thing going on, and a lot of raza. I see young writers, they're doing this. I think I also see, I agree so much with Roberto, I see this phenomenon. I think one of the hardest things when I'm just thinking about raza, because I've taught young people, Latinos, 40 years, And you're looking at generations and generations, and I think one of the further we got away from the movimiento, I'm not being nostalgic at all, the further away we got away from the movimiento, the more and the more integrated oftentimes that raza got into the university and teaching those young people. What occurs to me is they are increasingly more colonized. That's all I can say. I mean, increasingly more colonized. And that the American dream is something that it is the bane of our existence. And if you look at my critique about the literature, is that oftentimes that is the narrative, how we made it. And, there's a lot of young adult fiction doing that, and this is the primary time they're reading stuff, and it's always about, like this, how we made it. Not all of them, but much of them are. Even the stories of immigration, how we came across, suffered, and we made it, So it kind of sets up everything, to be, and then even so. Okay, that's one thought. The other thought is, the other phenomenon I see is also the appropriation of our ideas, so that they become neoliberal. So there is this, So even when we talk about Luis, I feel you. My brother, I feel you so much. Like just what you were talking about, how that these are illusions, right? The border is an illusion, race is an illusion, all of this. And I said, okay, I'm going to take what you just said, take that over, and and turn it into. I'm not saying you shouldn't say that. You have to keep saying. I mean, you don't need to tell me what. I don't have to tell you what you need to do. You know it, but it is so. When we say we're borderless. I mean, oftentimes I lament what they did to Gloria Anzaldúa's work. She was talking about a fierce understanding of border that she grew up in, that she knew in her flesh, in the Valle there, and and there is a whole, and again, this is very complex to me to talk about because I don't want to be misunderstood, but I thought on a certain level, then then the border was used as sort of this site that allowed for. All the hybridities, and that somehow in that it becomes, it's okay to be anything. and how do we hold both? I always say that. How do you hold both thoughts in your head at the same time? That we know it's all illusion, and that we talked about this, I think, with Christina. I don't know if it was during or after dinner or at dinner or what, but that the body does not know a border. The body knows where it's from and where it belongs. It doesn't suddenly you go, now I'm in the United States. The body knows differently. So in ourselves, in our DNA, we know we have memory, and we are instructed in this country not to believe it, not to believe anything we know, that we are dumbed down. So we go to school and we get dumbed down because we enter it knowing lots. And nothing about the education, very little about the education tells us to return to those sites of knowledge. And this is where indigenous thought comes in. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm sorry, that is, it's like you go, those are ways that the body knows. And now, in the university, embodied knowledge, we got all this language for it. And the minute you got all the language for it, you have defanged it. So when you're talking about a revolutionary literature, it has to be one where you're so on your toes because they defang you really quick, And so I wrote down questions, risk, fear, taboo. If it scares you, and I've mentioned this before, if you know when you're writing it's dangerous, and thank you, Roberto, your book was very dangerous. There's like, all four of you. I read your books, and there was danger zones, really, really important danger zones in each one of them. And I really credit my students. I have to tell you, my students have helped me with this, with you all, because they would see things I hadn't even seen, and they're young. They'd see contradictions, they'd see openings, they'd see, their admiration was tremendous because you took risks. So that to me, so Maria, when you talk about joy, we need joy. Yes, right on. We really need joy. Yeah. But we need joy like we need risk. And what my critique of joy is that, everybody wants to jump to joy and not, and I'm not, I want joy. I actually say on a kind of daily, I just want to be, I want joy. What happened to joy, But it's like, but the literature, the literature, when you're talking, that Roberto is such a good question because it is probably the best joy that one can feel, and maybe this is just me or silly, is when you feel free. You're just free. And it's kind of when you look at the sights in your own self where you got free, then you're really laughing, like when you're really joy, that has something to do with freedom, So I'm all for, like going to a good show and in the Heights and all of that. That's right on, But I can't help having two thoughts in my head at the same time, which is, yes, we deserve this. We deserve this. But we also deserve the true, complex history and knowledge that we have. We need those expressed. And they're not necessarily about banderas, They're not necessarily about those flags, So anyway, I want to stop there.
Let me just add something really quickly. Even hope, and I believe Maria's right, we need hope, but even that could be an illusion. And joy can be an illusion. There's affectations that they push on us. The only real basis for hope and joy is to get through the roots of all the rage and underneath all the grief. And that's the hard thing for any of us as writers, as thinkers, to get our community to go through this, to get us to go through it, the hard work of going through the rage and the grief, then the joy becomes revolutionary and transformative. There's too much affectation. Yeah, I know you're not saying that, Maria, because I know you.
I actually think that what you're saying is that when you, I think that in all of our work, actually, the work kind of reveals that each of us has had to go into that depth of grief of like, oh shit, I'm about to lose it all. It's about to come crashing. Everything's, and then you can understand the joy and the gratitude in a way that is much. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we should all be partying at this time when there's such hell going on. But at the same time, yes, our joy and our partying is a form of saying we're going to survive. And yes, at the same time, we're far from liberation. We have so much work to do.
And let me just add something. I'm sorry, but I have a great grandson who's Mexican, Scotch Irish, African American, and Puerto Rican. Where's the world for that kid?
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be fractured. It can't be all those fractures. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Not that they're not important, but where is the world for that kid where that fracturing is not going to be his whole life? You know what I mean? Where he becomes.
I hope he runs for president.
Yeah, where he could actually be whole and complete no matter who he is, where he was born, and where he's going. That is the struggle of our literature and the ideas that we're trying to present.
See. So, Maria, I think you're on.
So it's all so deep. I was like, oh my God, I need to ask a deeper question. But then I guess Cherríe knew that I might just kind of mix it up a little bit. And so I like Roberto, and unlike Cherríe or Luis or Cristina, I'm a journalist who is now increasingly becoming more of a writer. And so I'm like Luis, I'm like, oh my God, they're calling me a writer. Am I a writer? I guess I'm a writer. Like, yeah. So, and there's been a lot of fear around, the imposter syndrome around writing. Are we good enough? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had to really come up. I mean, as a journalist, you put a deadline on me, and that's the best thing that you can do. Because as a journalist, I will never bust a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
It's forced me, the book writing has really forced me to have to find ways that I can write when I maybe don't feel like I want to write. But, I have to write because I have only 5 months to write, and that's it. I have to write. So what are some of the secret things? And you don't just give us one or two. We don't have to talk about this for 20 minutes. We can move on to another question. But so this can be short and sweet if you want. But what are you prepared to reveal about some of the secret things that you do to help you write, to inspire you to write, to get you to write, to when you got to write?
I'm going to go ahead and start since I started the other ones. Actually, as you know, I am a journalist as well. And I don't think everybody here has journalism somewhere. And I started off with journalism because you couldn't make a living as a poet or even a novelist as Chicanos. I mean, who did, but there was newspapers, and there was a struggle in the early 80s to bring in people of color into journalism, as you might know. So I got into the summer program for minority journalists that was being taught at UC Berkeley for 11 weeks to bring in people of color into the newsroom. Almost all those people, by the way, were either kicked out of the newsroom or quit. The battle to be that voice carrying those stories into the newsroom was horrendous. Of course, more people have come in, some people have been successful, and it's really great to see more people into journalism, but it was quite a struggle. And so I mention all this to say, because my idea of getting into my writing is to get into the entrails of what it is I'm writing about. So when, for example, I was given this from Duke University, the Center for Documentary Studies gave me a fellowship to study the Maras in LA and in El Salvador. It was a journalistic fellowship. And so I got some money and I went down there because people were talking about these Maras in 92, 93, but nobody really understood them. I understood them because I knew the barrio world. They were all part of La Vida Loca. They were all part of the world that I was in, but nobody understood them. So I'm glad they gave me the stand. And I went to those, to El Salvador, went to LA, went to some, and I just had to get right in the entrails of it. You know what I'm saying? Just like Roberto does. You can't just talk about this noise. You have to be among them. You have to talk to them. You have to have your life threatened by them. And I have. And you have to be also seen as somebody that's not a threat to them. I just mention all this because that's what I do. When I write about the gang kids, I'm in the gangs. I write about Chicago gangs because I was there. I didn't just hang around. My son was in the gangs and I worked with all his homies and all the gangs they knew, and I started doing all this gang work right in the middle of the gang war. 90s was the worst period of gang violence in the United States, and I was right there. This is how you learn. This is what I wrote. I wrote about these things that I knew, whatever it might be. And I just say that that's what gives me my writing momentum, drive. Even if I'm trying to learn something new, I have to go to the right, into the middle of everything, and it is dangerous, as Cherríe says. We're all in this dangerous work. On the other hand, I also know that that means all of us have had to be quite courageous and fierce in our work and in our expressing the work, because very few people will get it. I do want to add one last thing. One of the problems I'm having is trying to get, as you can imagine, Hollywood to understand this story, not just the Latino story, not just a Mexican story, this story. 28 years I've been struggling for them to get Always Running right. They'll never get it right. I don't care if they give me money or no. I've been offered millions of dollars, believe it or not, to do Always Running, and I backed off because it would be a mess if they did it. It would be horrendous. I can't imagine not doing it unless I'm involved intimately in this work, and they don't really like that. Yeah, so the point is, then I don't care. It's either gets done well or not. But that's a struggle that I can give you stories, and I want to do it here, horrendous stories of how Hollywood has mistreated people like me and mistreated our stories in the way that they've decided what's the Latino story. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that as a writer, then I have to be able to speak and write about those things that I know about very well. Nobody can challenge me. At the same time, to get deeper, I call it the entrails, every aspect of it, all the way to the bottom.
Entrañas is a much better word than entrails. Entrañas is just such a much better word.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, we tried to translate that, estado entrañable, in my book, and it's so complicated just to say that. And we came up with, what was a visceral state? And in any case, yeah, you're right. Entrañable is a way better word. Let me just say that I am by training, I'm a historian and I'm a sociologist, even though I always knew I wanted to write. I didn't want to study literature because I somehow knew that I was going to be reading those books and that, the literary works, but that, and I knew that I needed some other form of training. I needed that in order to have something meaningful to contribute to these conversations that really what books are. I needed to deeply and critically understand the world in which I was living and of which I understood very little, right? So I say that because I really think that writing is always a way of research. There is no research. There is no writing without research, and I don't mean academic research, right? I mean research like the one that Luis just described, being there, paying close attention, sharing the world that you are interested in, and uncovering for others. I also think research might be just to lay down and look at the ceiling, right? And just trying to entertain whatever thought comes to your mind. And that's might be incredibly important for your own work. So I do think that research, that's where care resides. When we talk about writing as a caring practice too, I think at least my way of showing respect for the processes that I'm trying to explore is to do as thorough a research as I can. And if that means going to archives, doing interviews, going, to the end of the world, being silent for 30 days, whatever it takes in order for me to be able to capture the kind of subtleties, the kind of minutiae that sometimes become so relevant in the writing processes as such. So research and organizing time around that, to me, is just essential. Now, I said earlier, and I think we all agreed, I think that's what I'm hearing in any case, of the relevance of the body in the writing process. And very often I mean this in a very literal way. When I get ready when I know that I'm going to be working in a book, I have to prepare myself as though for a marathon. It might look like we're just sitting down doing nothing, but it's an effort, and your body goes through lots of shit. I mean, it's you have to be there 100%. Is your mind, is your spirit, it's all of your whole being, right? Embodied right there. And I found out, it took me time to understand that I had to take care of that too. That training and that caring of the self was incredibly important for whatever I wanted to achieve writing-wise. So I've been practicing sports from an early age. I was in a swimming team when I was a kid. An activity that I shared with my sister, by the way. So it's a very emotional type of practice for me now, and I do I do associate what I do when I was swimming and my writing. It's all a matter of breathing, right? Keeping that attention, very close attention to your breathing patterns, which is another way of paying attention to what your body is asking from you and for you, right? So I did that. Let me talk about this very practical aspect. I tried to swim on daily basis and to bring together my writing practice with my swimming practice. But then I was also aging at the same time, and I had one of those little injuries, and the rotator cuff didn't want me to continue swimming. And wow, man, that was such a tragedy. And I thought, well, here it goes, my writing practice. Fortunately, I can still walk. And I've been, and I know that you run, Maria. I've seen your tweets along this, about this activity. Well, for me now, I need to do it, but I do it not only for I mean, it's fun and it's very calming. It's a form of meditation in many ways. And I think it's very closely related to the kind of energy and temperament that I bring also to the writing. So when I'm talking about it is a writing that writes, I mean, it is a body that writes, I truly believe that I have to pay as much attention to that aspect. It's not only what I know, what I think, what I'm able to remember, what I'm able to connect with mentally or intellectually, but it has to be, as all of you have said, it has to be something that is deeply felt, bodily felt, embodied in me, embedded in me too. And that requires that kind of discipline, that kind of care too. So I look forward to many more days of walking as if I don't get another of those awful injuries, just being aware of that breathing and in many ways trying to bring at peace with the many things that I will never be able to fully explore, just being okay with the approaching of things, with getting to the point that I just feel comfortable with it, but doing it on daily basis, writing those 2 or 3 hours, if I can get away with that, and if I can only write for an hour, that's fine too. But that's just a way of reminding myself that it is a body there, and it's a body that is connected materially as well with other bodies, and that's something that I'm doing with others. So that helps.
Yeah. Roberto, you want to talk about your secrets?
No, I don't. Copyrighted and spies everywhere. No, good, excellent question, Maria. I just want to take a brief aside to give Maria a big shout out for, despite her youth, all these years navigating the corporate media structures. on her own terms, by and large. You know, being able to be, like, I work with Maria, unbeknownst to many, one of my secrets is we work together on Lost in Detention to expose the difficult truth that Barack Obama was jailing children and mothers and exposing thousands of them to rape and other destructive, life unaffirming things. So shout out to Maria, because you see her there and Maria gets it through. And that's something to learn, you know, to study, to be strategic about it. In a previous life, I was a strategist. So I look at people's strategies. So I'll give a practical response first, followed by a couple of other things. One is recognize that the publishing industry is fabulously corrupt, fantastically corrupt. There's no question. I don't want to argue. We'll throw down if you want to argue with me. But I got Miriam Gerber and other people that we showed with Dignidad Literaria that is in fact true when you have an industry that erases us to the tune of 1% of all books. And David Bowes, by the way, I should mention David. Only 1% of all books speak for 60 million people. That math doesn't add up. 1% of all books are written by Latinx, Afro-Latinx, Mexican, Salvadoran, whatever Latinx you are. Only 1% of the books in the entire country speak by and about you. So it's a very power-laden situation that I had to figure out, how am I going to get these people to publish my ass on my own terms? If I'm going to come out and say, well, you know, I actually tried to throw down against the fascist military dictatorships that you propped up, United States. You know, how do I do that? So one of the ways I did it was strategy, was, okay, well, I'm going to titillate them with the things that they want to hear about gangs and about revolution, but I wasn't going to exoticize them. I wrote what I wrote first. I had my book first draft written by the time I got an agent and then an editor. And in strategic terms, that means I defined the theater of battle. In other words, you're coming onto my territory and you're going to come and tell me this needs to go in my hood. Difficult. You know, soy hijo de mi mamá. So that's a practical thing where it's a power-laden relationship of negotiation. And the more you have defined the territory for yourself by writing your story first, the less you're going to be a fucking sellout, right? Because let me just say that there are Binaratis out there. So the other thing I would say is, you know, after having traversed over 30 years and then through my family, 90 years of war, genocide, landscape with gang violence and narco violence, I discovered the power of the beautiful and the sublime. Because that's what carried me forth so that I didn't put a fucking bullet in my head, right? Because that was a reality for me in a previous life. And you can't underestimate that. That's going to carry you forward. And it's kind of my response to my question too, the way that will carry you forward. I see it in everybody's writing. And so, I mean, the other thing, I won't go into it, but microdose. But that aside.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. See,
Yeah,
I listened to, I just handed in the first draft of the young readers version of Once I Was You. And I had to write it relatively quickly. I mean, we had the book already. So I was hypnotizing myself in the mornings with a little hybrid and just like binaural beats. And I'm just like, I got to go into a hypnotic state because I have to try and remember when I was like 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
One last thing I'll share is a quote, because it speaks to what I want to say. And I hate to quote a dead white dude, but sometimes they can be useful. So it was attributed to Goethe, the polymath of the German polymath of the 19th century, but it in fact was written by a dude named William Hutchinson Murray. And it speaks to the importance of commitment, because you got to be ferociously committed to your project to get it on the page and then to be able to defend it before the racist, patriarchal, classist, capitalist publishing system. So So that's what carried me through was commitment. And it says, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance which no person could have dreamed would come their way. Whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. And so commitment, rather than providence, just insert the word subconscious, because your commitment allows you to tap into your subconscious, to be able to draw on that most powerful part of yourself.
Let me just add something. It's also not giving up. Part of my story as a journalist was that I was blackballed and blacklisted for my work in San Bernardino. I was covering the crimes. They had me as a crime reporter, and I was getting tired of it for 2 years. They had me. I saw more dead bodies than any human being should ever have to see. San Bernardino was a crazy place. Had the second highest murder rate in the country at the time, but one of the things that happened is the cops had killed this homeless man by choking him when it was declared unlawful to do that. I was doing this story. I was bringing out the facts. We had witnesses. The editor met with me and says, "You got to stop the story." This is a journalist. He says, "How am I going to stop the story? I can't. It's just the truth. This is what happened." Well, it turns out he was playing golf with the police chief every Sunday. This is the Republican editor of San Bernardino Sun. I don't mind saying it, putting it out there. And so they were starting to undermine me. They started to have cops chase me down. They started to have people look at me. They started to try to set me up all kinds of ways. It's in my memoir, It Calls You Back. I don't want to get into details. But I do know that I quit the newspaper because I said, this is not journalism. You are a bunch of hypocrites and liars, and I want to be a journalist. Well, I couldn't get a job in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, at the Long Beach paper, at the San Pasadena paper. I put all my clippings out everywhere. Nobody would hire me because he was telling everybody that I was a communist and an advocate and don't hire him. That was the end of my daily newspaper career. The thing was, like Roberto, I was going to give it all up. I couldn't do it. And I'm glad I didn't. I kept at it. I kept working on my own. I kept getting other opportunities. Eventually, when I was in Chicago, I worked for CNN, NBC, and Westinghouse covering stories. So the point being that part of what I think that quote by Goethe is, be bold, begin it, but also don't stop, because we need, with all the barriers.
Yes.
I mean, one thing that Cherríe said that I know she didn't say it this way, but I want to say, one young person recently said, "I'm a privileged person and I have no right to be in the community," which is really weird. And I go, okay, I am, compared to others, I'm doing better. I'm not homeless anymore. I'm not in the street. I have a house. I have like you, Maria, I have 3 grown men sons live with me. But we're all doing good. But this is not privilege. I told her we have to fight every step of the way to get this. And we're still fighting. You think I've achieved a level of success where now I don't have to be careful how many blocks, how many people are going to close doors, how many publishers will not publish my work? Because even to this day, I send manuscripts out. I get rejection after rejection even now. You don't have to win big awards. You don't have to. It doesn't matter if I win. It doesn't matter if I taught at CSUN, California State University at Northridge. It doesn't matter. They still find ways to say you're not good enough for what we want. So my thing is, this is a struggle. Every time we've had to struggle every step of the way.
Yep.
It's going to be a struggle no matter what. Because you live in the United States of America, and the American dream is really a nightmare. So you might as well do something that is going to, that fulfills you. By the way, I think many of us, when we were younger, didn't exactly know. So for those of you who are younger, if you're like, well, I don't really know, it's okay. Keep at it too, because it shall, we're giving you a nice basis here upon which to to stay at the work and the commitment. By the way, thank you, Luis, for saying that, because today, I have a nonprofit, Futuro Media, that I started 11 years ago. You guys, Luis, how hard it is to keep something like this going. I mean, and today happened to be a good day, and we're doing well as a small nonprofit in the media world. And Roberto, thank you for the shout out on that. But I said to my team, I'm just so glad we never gave up, man, because so many times we came and it was like, why didn't we give up? Because of our commitment to the people who listen, read, trust us. And so commitment, responsibility, understanding the notion that you may have privilege because you can write, but it's all about the responsibility and your place. So those were beautiful questions. But I really just wondered if you microdosed like Lovato. Okay, I'm just kidding.
So I think the thing about it goes back to what Cristina was saying about the we, that we write. I mean, that is what keeps one going, there's somebody out there listening to you. And you can't always know that when you start writing. You can't always know that when you're young, that there's somebody there. So you have to kind of do it on a hunch. I think what I want to say too, and maybe this kind of goes to the thing about the microdosing thing. I work really hard not to do any drugs or alcohol or anything when I write. I really work hard not to do that. And there's no judgment here, you guys. I'm not judging, okay? So don't trip. I just mean, and I think that's the body part, is that when I'm scared when I write, I know that I'm on some. That I'm near something, and I gotta be in it. I gotta get in it and be in it, and not that any other any drugs or alcohol, anything can't be in it. I'm not saying that. 'Cause that's just not what I do. And I think because for me, this is what I feel. For me, I need longevity as a writer. And I need to know that I can do it anyway, anyhow, and that I have the muscle in me, that muscle is worked enough that I get used to doing it, that I get used to, in my own body, digging it up, and I'm familiar, because then I can say, oh yeah, I know that feeling, I'm on something. I'm onto something. And I begin to rely on that. And so when I have a writer's block, or it's terrible what I'm writing, or I don't like it, and I don't lose confidence, because I know that's one stage of when that muscle comes back again. I'm on my groove, and I can do it. So I just want to say that, because I think, also we're talking to a lot of young people, and I want them to also know that we all find our road one way or another how to do it. And I say that with all due respect to my colegas here. And and I'm a fool. I drink. If I have a couple shots of tequila, it loosens me up for a minute, and then I look at what I wrote the next morning. I'm going, oh, that's it wasn't much. So I'm just saying. So
listen, I had 2 shots of tequila earlier. What was it? Monday night. I'm still not recuperated.
Well, there you go. It's the tequila. Yeah. Well, and the other part I wanted to say too is that because you asked a really specific question, I think it's important. I think editing is everything. I think most of writing is editing, So first you generate, and that's what we're talking about right now. That you're generating, and then you're trying not to get those sensors out of the way. And it's so important what people are saying about the subconscious. I always refer to it as the unconscious. That I think Roberto said that. So what you want to do is you want to get your ego out of the room so that the unconscious will come up, because it's much more intelligent than our ego. The ego is for editing. And then you have to also have a generous ego for editing, because, sometimes you're editing out your best stuff because of your own self-doubts or what have you. So there's a really important relationship to editing that requires a lot of revisioning. So you got to know when to put it down. You got to know when to come back. You got to have cold reads. You got to not see it for 2 weeks and come back. There's all these things that to me, and they are quite individual, people's processes. But I do know that like when with Native Country in the Heart, which, you know, that's kind of my most recent experience about a longer work. I mean, I can't tell you how many drafts that book had, and, you know, and still in the editing process is where some of the best stuff came up. You know, in those final edits, even some of the best stuff, like, because there was one piece I could not write. And the book was actually ready to go, everything else, they're set, and I'm going, oh man, I didn't do it. And, you know, thank God I have a sister, because she said, you didn't do it. And she knew I didn't do it. And I managed in the last galleys to put in this one, you know, very short piece. And it made the book do what it was supposed to do, in my opinion. You know, it got there. So it's you know, that that's something that people don't talk very much about. So that's the only thing I wanted to add to that. So I knew this guy, I love it. I knew we were going to get beyond the first asking each other questions, which is quite wonderful. So Cristina, it's on you.
You know, I'm going to ask the question that I have planned, but let me just add to what you just said, because to me it's really, really, really important. Very often, it's so easy to talk about writing as a, you know, as a result of inspiration, and for sure, of course, that is involved. But I truly believe that much of that is work. I mean, writing is work, and we work with this very malleable, powerful matter, which is language, and it's not very glamorous. And your back aches, and then your wrists get carpal tunnel, and you know, all things happen because this is something that certainly you have to keep at it in many ways. So one time I got asked a question about what really pissed me off in terms of, you know, stereotypes about writing, and I was thinking that was such an easy question, and then but I kept on thinking about it, and then I just came up with that thinking of writing as an inspiration, as something that is going to happen as a result of some sort of divine, at times, inspiration. It really pisses me off because it's so deceiving of all the work that we all do on daily basis, and all the kind of negotiations and that you have to do with your daily life, with many other things that we have to do as well, right?
Right.
And so, and honoring that in the process of editing, I think is really, really important. And last week, when I was talking with Cherríe right there in Santa Barbara, it was so funny that we were editing our reading, even at that precise moment. No, let's not read that sentence. Let's do this other way. So it never ends, I wanted to say. So thank you for bringing that up. And I was thinking that after listening to all of you and after participating in this long conversation with Cherríe, I'm just very curious about what is next, what is coming, what are you planning on doing, what other books or other projects are going to be, should we expect from you? And I'm saying this because I just published in Mexico one of the most difficult books I've written is El Invencible Verano de Liliana, which is an exploration of the femicide of my sister, which happened 30 years ago. And so it has required a lot of the commitment and the fearlessness and all the discipline and all the issues that you've been mentioning right here so far. And this morning, a very young, very generous journalist asked me, so are you done? What is next? And I haven't even had time to think about it. I'm still going through the shock of having completed this work, and I'm right now kind of unpacking it and sharing it with the Spanish-speaking world in any case. But then I got to think that, well, of course, I do feel that there are other books in me. But in addition to that, I was reminded that that producing writing is just a part of the many other aspects of the many other activities that we get involved with. I do teach, and teaching for me is another way of keeping up with my writing. I've been leading this PhD in creative writing in Spanish, which we just began at the University of Houston some 4 years ago. And to me, this is my activism. I mean, we began, we launched that program right in 2017 when Spanish was being deleted from the webpage of the White House. And we were saying, no, you can't have a writing life in Spanish in this country. We are one of the 50, 60 million of Spanish speakers of the United States. And we live, after all, in the second largest Spanish speaking country of the world, second only to Mexico. And we might be one of the 11 billion Spanish English bilinguals in this country as well. And I am part also of this growing number of Latinx writers from Latin America who are writing from within the United States, a good chunk of what we still call, somehow not very accurately, Latin American writing. Sometimes writing in Spanish, very often writing that in English as well. And so just participating, contributing somehow to these energies, that keeps me writing too. That's part of the activism, part of the commitment that is not only present in the moment of production, but also in the different aspects of the circulation of our works. And by works, I mean, the books that we write, but also the workshops that we teach, the community work that we do, I don't know, all these other activities that to me are just as essential as sitting down to write. I mean, all of that makes sense. The writing makes sense in connection with these other aspects. So I'm a writer who loves to teach. I don't think teaching is limiting my capacity of writing. In fact, I get to talk about things that matter really dearly to me, almost on a weekly basis, at least with really talented, generous students, and I love that, and I want to see more of that in my future. So I think that's what is next for me. But I want really to pose that question to you and see what is next for each one of you.
So
Let me go ahead and start,
Luis,
if you don't mind. Yeah,
you keep doing that.
First of all, the nonprofit, I'm glad you brought up about nonprofit. Thank you, Maria, because you are doing this very important work that sometimes writers don't do. I'm an activist in community. So Tia Chucha Centro Cultural is moving into a new space. It's getting bigger. And we're also, the press is doing some amazing work. We're kind of working on Central American writers right now. So we got Humberto Acabal, the late Quiché Mayan poet. We're going to put out his book coming out in any day. And we're going to be doing the work of Claudia Castro Luna, the Washington State a poet laureate Salvadoreña. We're going to do her book in the spring. And then I'm doing the work of Edward Tick. He's not Central American, but he's been working with war. He's the one that does war and the soul. He does those books. He's got a poetry book in honor of the Vietnamese people. So these are the things that we're doing. For me personally, I'm also writing. I'm working on, for years, the possible always running as a streaming TV show. I'm working with my good friend Montezuma Esparza. We're having our battles, but we're also getting some interest. A ver qué pasa.
Sí.
We'll see. I'm also working on a new book of poetry that I'm calling Mixcoat right now. Mixcoat is my Nahuatl name, and it's what I want to call it. I also have a short story collection that I'm putting together that I'm calling Chingazos. We'll see what happens to the final title, but right now they're all chingazos, all these stories. And then I'm also got another book of essays that I'm calling Our Grandmothers Talking. I appreciated that Roberto brought in his abuela bisabuelas, because I figure that all our grandparents have been talking to bring us together. All our grandparents have been talking among themselves to say, how can we start maneuvering from the other side, the language and the struggles and our stories. And this is why I feel this is powerful. And if we don't got much time to say, I want to thank you all for the rich dialogue, for the challenges, and that our grandmothers are talking, bringing us together. Gracias.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful last line. We should just stop right there.
Yeah, right?
That's really good. Maria, you want to say what you're working on, Roberto?
So, yeah, I think really I do want to stress that 11 years in to running this nonprofit, this is the first time when we can kind of be like, okay, we're okay. And I just, it's 11 years, people are like, oh my God, you're such a success. And it's like, Latino USA has been on the air for, in 2023, it will be 30 years. And so, yeah, and so that's a lot of work. Anyway, I'm happy to report that there's a lot of stuff happening. Me encanta lo que dijiste, Roberto Lovato. I have to kind of own that. You said, despite su juventud, Maria, something, something, something. And I was like, yeah, right. Because it's like, that's my concern, is that I'm like, geez, how much more can I squeeze? Like, will they be able to have the pills? That's why I actually, Cristina, you said I'm running. Actually, I'm a boxer. I try to run a little bit, but I'm an active boxer and increasingly lifting some weights, in the fight to try to stay strong. And also because I'm a chaparrita. And so, you just like, don't get close to me because I'll.
Maybe your book should be Chingazos.
It's very interesting. I like this question. I actually just had, because I just handed in the first draft of, so I'm pretty much done writing. I'll be doing some editing over the summer, but I'm pretty much done writing. And so I'm thinking about the next project. I know what it is. I actually don't want to say it. I have the title already, which is not the way it was with Once I Was You. But it will involve a story. If you haven't listened to Suave, the podcast, please do. Luis, Roberto, please listen to Suave. I met Suave when he was sentenced to life in prison as a juvenile at Graterford State Prison. He was never going to come out. And because of the Supreme Court, he gets out after doing 31 years. And I'm not going to tell you what happens, but because you're on lifetime parole, you can imagine. So I hope you get a chance to listen to the podcast in all of your free time. So I guess, there's a lot of writing going on. Futuro is expanding. Most importantly, right now, I'm developing an investigative unit. And so as far as I know, I'm going to put that qualifier out there, because as far as I know, I'm the only person right now that is running an actual national investigative unit that is dedicated to Latinos and Latinas in English, and also immigration. So if you know anybody, if you have a story, if you have a whistleblower, if you're a journalist, if you know how to produce, apply for the jobs. We have some jobs up. And so, really happy to be able to employ journalists of color and of conscience in an increasing way. And who knows, I'm an actor in The Heights, in the movie. I have my Hollywood debut. It's not a cameo. It's an actual actor. I'm playing a role that
Maria, I'll make you one of the home girls, okay?
Ay, por favor, por favor. Ay, por favor, me muero de ganas. But yeah, so dreams come true, so maybe there's a Hollywood film that I'll be producing or somehow involved in. To me, the sky is the limit, and I'm increasingly motivated by Cherríe and by Luis and Roberto and Cristina. So honestly, what a beautiful evening. I wish it was in person, and then that I would have arrived enough time in LA or in California that I would have gotten the adjustment for the time and all that stuff. And then we could go out to have dinner and I'd be able to stay awake throughout dinner. But
next time.
Thank you, Cherríe.
Roberto.
Well, thank you, Cherríe. Thank you to all my colegas. I come back with even more aprecio for each of you and your work, despite all your youth, all of you. I speak probably as the youngest one here. Let me just put that out there. But next September, the paperback of Unforgetting comes out.
Good.
Yeah, it's going to have a different cover. It's going to have me with hair, little curly fro, with graduating from middle school with a really pissed off look on my face next to my mom and dad before I became the kind of raging person that I became for a minute. But new stuff, I'm starting to write again my journalism with, I'm starting with The Nation right now because I've been with them for, maybe 20 years, and they've treated me well, and I'm going to be writing at least monthly for them. I just wrote a piece called The Age of Intersectional Empire is Upon Us. Like, all this bullshit they're throwing at us with Kamala Harris and the most diverse cabinet. Who gives a shit that Alejandro Mayorkas, a Cuban American, is the head of the most militarized bureaucracy within the borders of the United States? I could give a flying rolling donut myself. So, and about Kamala and about anybody else. I don't care what your ethnicity is. If you're fucking for empire, you're kind of the enemy, man. So, that said, more beautiful note. I have a project that I've started at Berkeley when I was a fellow there, and I'm going to dust it off after the last book that I'm working on right now that I'll tell you about. But the next book after the one I'm doing now is about two things. One is about, I have this obsession with macaws, scarlet macaws, guacamayas, papagayos, depending on where you're from. It's that, walking, talking, flying rainbow of a bird that, graces beer cans and, tropical themed stupid commercials. But there's a deep history behind that. But I went to Chihuahua and I went to this zona that was being contested between the Juarez and Sinaloa cartels. Unbeknownst to most, there's some of the most fabulous ruins, archaeological ruins in Mexico, north of El DF, are in the middle of the desert in Chihuahua, Paquime.
Yeah, no, I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they had they found the bones of 500 macaws, scarlet macaws there. So the question, what the hell is that bird doing there? So, they extended the habitat of this bird all the way up to Colorado from talking to archaeologists. And so then the habitat of that bird extends from Sudamerica all the way to Colorado. And so that bird is a symbol of what I call the continental unconscious that brings many of us people of the Americas together, which is part, kind of like what Unforgetting is about if you read between the lines. And so, but that was also going to be about my mom, because I wrote this book about my dad and me, and my mom's energy was more the power of that bird to span the continent without fear and without barriers. My mom was the most borderless person I ever met, mostly for good. Sometimes my own borders as a kid, my mom was like there, hey, mijo, doing some border thing. But my real project that I'm doing right now, materially speaking, is tentatively titled Letters to a Young Poet Warrior. It's a series, it's kind of following on the German poet, gorgeous poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet, but it's kind of updating that for the 21st century at a time of extremities. And how can but I'm writing it from the perspective of I want to create this tradition that's there for me, but that I haven't seen really in Spanish or in English. Maybe Cristina or any of you can tell me if it exists, but there's a tradition in America Latina where the distinction between poetics and politics was never really solid, like the bordered off conception of literature that we have in the United States.
Right on, yeah.
And so you have in El Salvador, I got inspired by not just Roque Dalton, but also Gioconda Belli in Nicaragua. They were guerrilla poets. And in El Salvador, guerrillas actually founded one of the 5 major organizations in the FMLN. I mean, poets founded, they were members of La Mazacuata, and poets founded a revolutionary organization, political military. So I want to kind of translate that poet warrior tradition into the English language and drop whatever I can drop for these aspiring young radical writers out there that are trying to figure out how to navigate this thing. And thank you again. It's been an honor and a privilege for me to be among you all.
Bueno, I guess I'll just say you know, this is part of my project. Las Maestras Center for Chicana Indigenous Thought, Art, and Social Practice. We've been around 4 years. And if you're listening, support us, subscribe to us, go on Instagram, do the YouTube channel. All of these, by the way, each individual writer here has, if you weren't around before, it talks at least 2 hours with me and sometimes with Celia. So it's there. It's really great material. And anyway, that is much of my work right now. And I'm working on, when I'm close to being finished, I was commissioned to write by Level Forward, a production company in New York and LA, to write a feature-length film of Chavela Vargas.
Oh, wow.
La Famosa. And, you know, we have a lot in common, she and I. I don't sing as well as her, but I know a little bit about
You're doing that with Kat Gunn, right?
Huh? Yeah.
I just
And,
found that out. I was like, wait, you're working with Cherríe? And it's like,
Yeah, she's one of the
Oh,
co-producers. Yeah, and Kat did the
the
documentary.
movie, Chavela. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
it's just
Maria in it.
fabulous,
Why don't you
fabulous.
put Maria in it?
Pardon me? Put Maria in it. Otra vez con
She
Maria.
started her.
No, Maria's in all the shows now.
She's gonna be in
I've
everybody's.
got an
everybody's trip.
agent. His name is Roberto Lovato.
I
and
think
if you don't
so.
cast me, let me tell you, he knows some bad people.
Yes,
He
he
takes
does.
it back, a
yeah.
big cut though.
Anyway, so I'm working on that, and soon it's getting there, you guys. If you're listening, it's getting there, and it's a first screenplay I've written. I've written theater for years, and so I find it very challenging and very exciting. I mean, it's so wonderful to be able to do things sort of just visually, you know, and it's making me very humble about how much dialogue is really necessary in this life, in telling a story. Really, I'm learning a great deal, so I'm grateful for that. So I was gonna, we had planned that each of you were going to do a little clip of your work, but I think we need to make it shorter than 3 minutes. So if there's just like a little line or something, my idea, what I'm going to do is say my thank yous now. This is the plan. I'm going to do my thank yous now, and then I'm going to have us go out with each of us just picking a little, maybe 4 lines from you. And it's one collective voice. This is the we. This is Christina's concept, right? Is that we're working together, we're writing together. I gain confidence and trust by knowing you 4 are in the world doing this too. And there's many more of us. So I have to find mine too, so we'll just find something. Okay.
You want me to go ahead and start?
When you're
Cher?
ready, Luis, we'll go in the same order then, right?
Okay, so I'm going to shorten what I was going to read.
Yes,
It's from my essay, Constant State of Pregnancy.
muy bien.
The late Chicano poet Abelardo Lalo Delgado once wrote that being a Chicano writer was like being in a constant state of pregnancy. Always full, heavy with story, in the throes of creation, but never birthing a baby. That's exactly how I felt the day I decided that writing was what I wanted to do. At the time, I worked as a millwright, maintaining the engines of an overhead crane above 4 electric furnaces at a Bethlehem steel mill. I had a scuffed hard hat, greasy uniform, tool belt, and steel-toed shoes. It was a substantial job. I should have been content. Instead, I felt as if my poems and stories were being drained out of me with every pouring of melted steel, every shearing blast, every pounding forge. Sorrow came in waves. Perhaps depression is a better word. It struck me that if I didn't do something about this writing thing soon, I never would. The year was 1978. I was 24. To stay out of the trouble I was frequently in during my youth, I had turned to industry and construction. I learned skills like pipe fitting, rigging, mechanics, welding, framing homes and warehouses. This was the right thing. But newly separated from my wife and 2 babies, I was alone, afraid, unsure, drinking too much. I felt this was my last chance at bringing out what ached inside before it became a rotting, dead thing I carry around.
Roberto, we'll just go.
All right. This is at the end of my book. Just some closing thoughts as a way to close. So, and I'm talking about forensics and my fascination with it. My search for my own unknown past is one reason I was so enthralled by the Instituto de Medicina Legal, the forensic lab in El Salvador, a vault of so many untold violent stories. Watching the rituals of forensic recovery led me to believe that unforgetting is a critical way to start the process of individual, familial, and national healing. The power to reconstruct the bones of a person and return them to the family haunted by the disappearance of their loved ones enables a critical step toward healing. It's the knowing that their loved one is dead and how he or she died that allows these families to conduct burial rites and mourn. Without this unforgetting, they can have no closure and are held in terrible limbo. The same applies to reconstructing the bones of our personal and national memories, including the memory of what it is to be American, the identity that has caused so much devastation to those of us who identify as Salvadoran. Being American has taught me that the difficult future before us demands that we set aside the myths and infantile stories we tell ourselves about this country. Being Salvadoreño has taught me about the still urgent need to create the epic, revolutionary sensibility we will need to survive the epic history that awaits us in the best of circumstances. Thank you.
So this is a part where I get together with, I'm a young journalist in New York. I'm a young Latina journalist, and I'm beginning to realize that I'm not the only one. Here and there, I began to see fellow Latina journalists. Elaine Rivera, Rose Arce, Evelyn Hernandez, and Edna Negron wrote for Newsday. Sandra Guzman and Rosana Rosado were at El Diario. Blanca Rosa Vilches reported for Univision Network, and Miriam Ayala for the local Spanish language station. Maria Newman, along with Mireya Navarro, were at the New York Times. We began to notice one another because we were all Latinas, yes, but there was also a way in which we moved in this world of reporting because of the communities we either came from or were reporting on. We revealed our humble badassery, chingona, Afro, Taína, princess, guerrera shit mixed with humility, only to some, because to let down our warrior faces and to display our vulnerability to everyone might take away our superpower to survive. There were just enough of us that we had a mirror to hold up to ourselves. I was determined to learn from these Latina journalists. What I didn't realize was that they looked at me with the same respect and love as I did them. I was too insecure to see that at the time, because the imposter thing can follow us everywhere like a pinche sombra.
Muy bien. Bien, excelente. Ha sido un placer estar con todos ustedes. Muchas gracias. Y ojalá que sigamos conversando, por supuesto. And so I'm going to read the last section of the essay, Writing a Migration. That's a piece that I wrote as a reader of Lina Meruana's work. Lina is from Chile, but she lives in New York. So I was trying to compare the way in which she tells the story of her grandparents from Palestine and their journey, first to Chile and then for her personally to the United States. And I was comparing that to the journey, the migrating journey of my own grandparents, the one that I started to tell you about at the beginning of this conversation. So this is writing from the United States. There is always someone who has migrated before. That is what I'm trying to say. When we believe we have embarked on this journey with no return, this displacement that subdivides or multiplies into many more, in reality, we are feeding the soles of our feet into the footsteps that others have left behind. There is no tabula rasa. We're just guests on the surface of a land that we experience in common. Someone was here where I am, and someone else will be here after my stay. Someone spoke this language, a language that was denied again and again. The reasons for that absence are the very thing of politics. The reasons for the presence are the very thing of ethics. Between them and us, in any case, there is a bridge that has a strong memory because it is organic and material, because it affects us and we affect it. Those who write from the United States do not have the luxury of forgetting that we continue to write in migration. In just the section of keep on writing, which is something that I tell myself all the time, because when faced with the questions, is it worth it to get up early in the morning just to keep writing? Can writing, in fact, be something that acts against fear or terror? Since when has a page stopped a bullet? Has someone ever used the book as a shield over their chest, just above their heart? Is there a protected zone, somehow invincible, around a written text? Is it possible, not to mention desirable, to grip or wield or raise a word? My answer continues to be yes, because yes is a small and sacred and savage word all at the same time. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you.
So beautiful. Gracias. This is from Native Country of the Heart. I had never fully grasped the early years of my mother's life until I slowed down long enough to silently witness her last ones. In her final handful of years, the full distance of a near-century lifetime would flash back in a second of recall, never to reappear. And yet my mother's failing mind once and forever convinced me of the body's ability to hold memory, which long surpassed her ability to speak it. It seems that when the body goes, memory resides in the molecules about us. We breathe in the last exhale of our mother's breath. This is what they bequeath to us, as they also bequeath their stories. Elvida's story is one of our forgotten, the landscape of loss paved over by American dreams come true. And maybe that's the worst of it, or what I fear, that our dreams can come true in America, but at the cost of a profound senility of spirit. If we forget ourselves, who will be left to remember us? And so I followed the trail of my mother's fleeting reminiscences, picking up in the wake of her steps each and every discarded scrap of unwritten testimonial. This is what the spiritual country of my mother's departure asked of me in the unspoken world of the deeply, deeply human. So thank you to all of the writers, also to Maya Gomez, our Associate Director, Stephanie Rubio, our publicist, Mariela Aguilar, Program Coordinator, Graduate Student Research Assistant, our interns, Yesenia Garcia Ramos, Angel, Vanessa, Alma Trejo, Rodriguez, Erika Snell, and Dave Knip, and all of those last people. Alma's the organizer of this, has been, facilitating, our work here in Kerr Media Center. And Erica, I feel like we have a relationship now. She's a camera woman. She anticipates everything. So mostly I want to thank everybody who's shown up and been really, all of you out there, you've been really, really faithful, I think, and we have felt your appreciation. Please pass the word about these magnificent writers. Buy their books, and mine too. But what I want to say is that I'm enormously, sometimes people use that word humble, like, oh, I'm a humble person. I really, really mean it, that I think that it's what Cristina was saying too, that all of these writers are writing, they have that in this time, these books, they are writing I with a we in mind. And to me, that is our revolutionary potential, that we move out of this individualism and really see that we do have common cause and that we can create good company with each other with real conciencia as we walk in this world. So thank you very much. Oh, Roberto, Cristina, Maria, it's Luis, man, my homeboy, I just found there have been a lot of reunions in this whole process. So I remain grateful, and que les vaya bien. Thank you.